Hello, all my students of Standard 10. How are you all? And how are we with our learning? Today we are going to continue with our story, the last lesson. Okay, this is my third module on that. I hope you have seen the other two modules. So let's continue from where we left. Okay. We were talking about little France, and he was thinking whether the Germans who have conquered France and those who have conquered Alsace and Lorraine, are they going to make even the pigeons sing in German? Is that what they are aiming at? That is the last thing that we did. Will they make them sing in German, even the pigeons? Now let's continue from there. Whenever I looked up from my writing, I saw Monsieur Hamel sitting motionless in his chair and gazing first at one thing, then at another, if he wanted to fix in his mind just how everything looked in that little room, because he had been teaching over there, you remember, for 40 years. So he was just gazing at everything as if he was trying to fix the image in his mind. Fancy, for 40 years he had been in the same place, with his garden outside the window and his class in front of him, just like that. So just imagine the plight of that teacher who had been sitting over there for 40 years. There was a garden outside his window, a garden which he himself had built. He made that garden for himself, and he sat on that chair over there with his students in front of him and with his garden outside. Okay. Only the desks and benches had been worn smooth. The walnut trees in the garden were taller, and the hop vine that he had planted himself twined about the windows to the roof. So the vine, which is a vineyard, it was growing, and it twined above till the roof. It's a creeper, no? Vine is a creeper, so creepers will always twine. So the hop vine that he had planted himself twined about the windows to the roof. How it must have broken his heart to leave it all. Poor man. All he could do was, he must be feeling so sad because he was not married probably, so he could hear his sister packing up everything because they had to move out. For they must leave the country the next day. Now this is again a visual imagery that the author has used over here. Alphonse Daudet has used a visual imagery where he is talking about his garden outside the window, his class in front of him. So you can imagine the class in front of him, you can imagine the window, you can imagine the garden over there, you can imagine. Then there is auditory imagery also where he is talking about his sister moving up and they could hear her footsteps and she was packing the trunks. But he had the courage to listen, to hear to every lesson to the very last. After the writing, he had a lesson in history, and then the babies chanted their ba, be, bi, bo, boo. So they were the vowels that he was teaching them. So he was teaching them to chant the vowels. Down there at the back of the room, old Hauser had put on his spectacles and holding his primer in both his hands spelled the letters with them. You could see that he too was crying. His voice trembled with emotion, and it was so funny to hear him that we all wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. Ah, how well I remember it. That was the last lesson. All at once, the church clock struck 12. Then the Angelus. At the same moment, the trumpets of the Prussians returning from the drill sounded under our windows. M. Hamel stood up, very pale in his chair. I never saw him looking so tall. My friends, said he, but something choked him. He could not go on. Then he turned to the blackboard, took a piece of chalk, and bearing on it with all his might, he wrote as large as he could, Vive la France. Long live France. That is the meaning of Vive la France. Like I've told you, we don't pronounce the E when we are learning. Some of you would have learned French better than me. I'm not a French student, but I know the pronunciation of this is Vive la France. Okay, and in English we would say Vive la France. Then he stopped and leaned his head against the wall, and without a word, he made a gesture to us with his hand. School is dismissed. You may go. That was the last statement that he made. It's a very sad sort of a story, and at the same time it also teaches you how to not give up, because he has taught them in the last lesson that don't give up your culture, don't give up your roots, don't give up your language, but because your native language is going to be the key to be able to conquer the conquerors, isn't it? That's what he taught. Okay, so now I've explained the story to you, and now I'll give you the style of the writing. What is the style of the writing? I'll give you the note first and then we can read it. I have given you the first page when I gave you the title. So with the title that you have seen, the first page is there. I come to the second page. Or for those of you who have not seen it, I can give it to you again. We begin with style. Okay, so let's read the style. The style is first person narrative, whose speaker is a young boy, Franz, a resident of Alsace district of France, which was occupied by the Prussians. This method of narration allows the reader to experience and understand his thoughts and feelings. The story's tone is anxious. I've told you the meaning of tone in my earlier modules. Tone is something which, while reading the story, what is the emotion that you're getting? So the emotion that we get is one of anxious. The story's tone is anxious and reflective, and the author's tone appears biased against the government and war. The author's tone is a biased one. Foreshadowing. Now, what is the foreshadowing that he has used in his style of narration? Foreshadowing has been used by the author in the scene where Franz sees a crowd of villagers gathered at the town hall bulletin board on his way to school. So when he has seen over there, you remember his thoughts that he had given us, that what is it now that they want to tell us, and he says that all our bad news had come from there itself. Where is it gone? Yeah, when I passed the town hall, there was a crowd in front of the bulletin board. For the last 2 years, all our bad news had come from there. The lost battles, the draft, the orders of the commanding officer. And I thought to myself without stopping, what can be the matter now? So that is the foreshadowing, that as if something is going to happen. Then literary devices have been used. You can put that as an example, okay? If you have read the lesson a number of times and you are able to quote, all the more better. Literary devices like simile, metaphors, imagery, etc., which I have discussed with you when we were reading the story. I have discussed all these literary devices in detail. So if you are asked about the literary device used by the author, you can either quote any of those. So like simile, metaphors, imagery, etc. have also been used by the author Alphonse Daudet. Emotions. What are the emotions involved? Emotions of sympathy and empathy are aroused in the reader through the character of Franz, the protagonist, through a sincere representation of his joys, fears and apprehensions. So through his emotions, we also get emotional. Okay, so that much for the style. Now ultimately I'm going to discuss with you the plot of the story. What is the plot of the story? I have written it down for you. You all can copy it. This is the plot of the story. Exposition. Plot of the story. Now you know that in literature, plot should have an exposition, then the rising action, then the climax, then the falling action, and then the resolution or the conclusion. We have these 5 things in the plot or in a story or a novel or a drama. I have discussed this n number of times with you all. So now what is the exposition? We are introduced to the setting and the protagonist, Franz, a little boy afraid of going to school as he has not done his French lesson. the rising action. Franz sees a crowd around the bulletin board. So the action is rising. First we are introduced. Then slowly the action has started to rise. He sees a crowd around the bulletin board. There is an unusual silence in the school. Important people of the village are present and seated at the back. So that is the rising action. And what is the climax? The teacher, Monsieur Amel, announces it is their last lesson in French. That is the climax. And Franz is devastated. Then we have the falling action. The teacher tells them to guard their language, for it is their key to the freedom. And then the resolution. An emotional teacher, M. Amel or Monsieur Amel, he writes, Vive la France, and dismisses the class. So he writes Vive la France. I made a mistake in the spelling over there. Please write an E over there. It is Vive la France, and he dismisses the class. So that is the conclusion. And with that, I am also going to conclude my story. Oh no, before I do, I want to discuss one more thing, critical appreciation, which is very important. We need to discuss the critical appreciation of the story. How would you critically appreciate this story if it is asked to you? Okay. Also, I have not given the themes. So we have to do the themes also. So now come on, it's very easy. What are the themes of the story? The first one is language and linguistic chauvinism. What is linguistic chauvinism? When somebody wants to force their language on people who have another native language, which is wrong. Like if your native language is any particular language, if somebody else is trying to force their language on you, then it is called as linguistic chauvinism. So this linguistic chauvinism is what the author Alphonse Daudet has touched on over here. Okay, so you can write down that the first theme is language and linguistic chauvinism. You can write that in your own words. How is it a linguistic chauvinism? Because the Germans were trying to impose French and telling them not to learn French anymore. So that is linguistic chauvinism. You are imposing your language and you are not allowing them to learn their language also, which is wrong. If you want your language to be learned, you tell people to learn your language, but you cannot tell them that don't learn your mother tongue. That is called linguistic chauvinism. Okay, where you only want your language to be learned and you want to stop them from learning their mother tongue, which is wrong. So you can write that in your own words. I've explained it to you a number of times. Then we have patriotism. Through the character of M. Amel, a figure of resistance and the one who fought the subjugation of his country, not through arms, but through arousing the patriotic feelings in his students. So how is this patriotism aroused? The patriotism in this story is aroused through the language through the teacher. The teacher M. Amel, he is arousing the patriotic feelings in the fellow villagers, and he's trying to teach them that you must be patriotic towards your country, which is Alsace-Lorraine. Alsace and Lorraine had been captured by the Germans, so he wants to arouse that patriotic feeling in them. Okay. And what is the way he aroused that? Because they could not write anything else, because they had not learned anything else. So he gives them a simple task. He just writes for them. He gives them all new copies, new books. If you read over there that he had new copies for us. See, after the grammar lesson, we had a lesson in writing. I've done this in module 2. After the grammar lesson, we had a lesson in writing. That day, M. Amel had new copies for us, written in a beautiful round hand, France, Alsace, and he wanted all of them to write those two words, that if nothing else, at least learn in French how to write France and Alsace. And then they were hung all above as if they were little flags. Okay, so he arouses the feeling of patriotism, and everybody, not only his students, even the villagers are his students at this moment. Okay, the elders of the villagers, the postmaster, then the mayor, and all of them have become his students at this minute. So, and also when he writes on the blackboard, when he writes the last words, Vive la France, and he teaches them that long live France. That is the lesson he has taught them. So he has aroused patriotism in his children. That is the way he arouses the feeling of patriotism. So patriotism is the second theme. The first theme is linguistic chauvinism. Okay, where you explain in your own words how it is linguistic chauvinism, where the Germans are trying to impose only German and stopping them from learning their own language, stopping them from learning their native language. The second theme is the theme of patriotism, where he is teaching them how to be patriotic towards their country. If you want, you can write down these points in short. I'll read them out. Through the character of M. Amel, these are not complete sentences, these are just pointers. You write the pointers and form your own sentences. So M. Amel is what? He is a figure of resistance, the one who fought the subjugation of his country. I will not allow my country to be subjugated. So he fought against the subjugation of his country. How did he fight? Not through arms, but through arousing the feelings of patriotism in his students. He gave them a simple writing task of copying the words France and Alsace all over and over and over and over and over and over again till they learned to write France and Alsace. And thus he arouses patriotic feelings in his children. Okay. You can write about that flags, like they look like flags which were floating everywhere. And then the last words on the blackboard, Vive la France. So that is also arousing patriotism. Then we come to the third theme, which is the theme of education. Now, what is the theme of education? How is the theme of education over here touched upon in this story? Because he makes them realize that education is so important and that we need to educate ourselves while we have the time to do so. You should never put off your education for another day. If you have the time, if you have the opportunity, do it now, here, at this very moment. That is what the author Alphonse Daudet has touched upon. The student earlier did not like his teacher, nor did he keep up with his studies. That is how he touches on that topic, that the student did not like his teacher earlier. He did not want to study. But he realizes in the last lesson how important it is that one equips himself with valuable knowledge and education which will support you in the times of crisis. Education is the only thing which can support you when you are undergoing a crisis, and therefore we need to be educated, not just literate, not just so that you can read, but to be educated, to understand what exactly education is. Okay, because he has aroused the feelings of patriotism in his students. Now, how do you come to critical appreciation? Very easy. How will you critically appreciate this story? Give it a thought by yourself. Very simple. Critically, you can appreciate by saying that the author has stressed on the importance of education, and he has stressed on the pain of linguistic chauvinism. That is also what he has stressed on. And he has stressed on the human tendency of procrastination, putting off things for a later time. Okay? So you can give your examples. The first thing, what does he stress on? How will you critically appreciate the importance of education? What is the example that you will give there about France, that he didn't like to go to school and all the rest of it? Then the second thing is the linguistic chauvinism. What is the example that you will give there? Very easy, that they didn't want them to learn French and they were imposing German. Then we come to the human tendency of procrastination. What is the example that you will give over there for procrastination? That he kept on postponing for another day. Everybody, the parents, the students, the teacher, everybody said, oh, we'll learn it another day. That other day may never come. Okay, give those examples. We've done the story in detail. And then, so that's it. And it also highlights that what is another part of critically, how will you appreciate? It highlights that the Prussians' rejection of the people of Lorraine and Alsace is freedom. They rejected them to learn their native language and impose German. So that is a way you would critically appreciate this story. And with that, I come to an end of this story also. And I have done this in great detail with you. Please look up the questions in your workbooks, whichever workbooks your schools have given you. Look them up, work over them, so that you are able to answer any question which is asked to you. Because children, don't forget, apart from the MCQs will test you on recalling the story, how well you know your facts. That is what the MCQs are for. But when you get your reference to context answers, that is where you will apply your mind and you will apply your knowledge which you have grasped. So you need to do both the things. So keep looking at the questions, keep looking at the workbook, see what questions they have asked, and keep your answers prepared, so that if you get a particular reference, you know what to answer. The references are not going to be out of the text, they are going to be from the text. So the text and the references from the text are very important. So keep reading your textbook over and over again. Okay, so here's your English facilitator, Hemangi, wishing you all a goodbye. Do study, do practice as much as you can. You will surely get good marks. It's not difficult. The CISCE board is a student friendly board, and they will give you the marks wherever you have a right over it. You will not just get marks, but if you have understood, if you have well expressed your thoughts will not be counted as wrong as far as they go along with the line of the author, and you will get your marks. Okay, bye everyone.